That's the one.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Luckily, it's a quick fix. So I'm going to be talking today about blockchain security. My name is Michael Perklin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Shapeshift.io. It's a asset exchange online. I'm also the president of C4, the Cryptocurrency Certification Consortium. Previously, I was the head of security at Ledger Labs and the president of Bitcoin Sultans. So I want to talk to you about blockchains. Blockchains are what's called a disruptive technology. Now, that word's been thrown around a lot. Disruptive means it completely changes the way that society lives. There's been a lot of disruptive technologies over the years, everything from electricity to cars to the telephone to the internet. Every one of these technologies, when they were invented, they drastically changed the landscape. They changed the way that you and I lived. And in doing so, they created a lot of great jobs. If you were a web programmer in the 1990s, you made a lot of money because you had a skill that not too many people had. But in addition to creating jobs, every disruptive technology also killed a lot of jobs as well. When you look at cars allowed people to travel vast distances, but they also killed the veterinarian. People didn't need to have horses as much as they did before. When you look at a lot of these technologies, a lot of these jobs died, but also a lot of industries and companies died as well. In the 1980s, all telecoms made the vast majority of their profit on long-distance fees. If you wanted to call your friend in France or Germany, you paid $20, $30 before the call. But then a brand new technology came out, the internet, and it totally changed the environment. Now suddenly you can talk to your friends online for free without any long-distance fees. So all telecoms, they had to either change their model entirely or they simply died. Blockchain technology is doing this today. It's replacing things like PayPal and Western Union. It's replacing bank wires. In a few years, these types of technologies will either have been replaced by something else or they'll just go extinct. Companies need to pivot or they will die. And with these blockchains, or with these disruptive technologies, when they first appear, they appear as what's called a walled garden. Now, a walled garden gets its name because inside everything looks rosy. I mean, sure, it's great to have this new technology, but if no one else is in that garden to enjoy it, then what's the point of having that garden? The internet had that, telephones had that. If you were one of the first people to have a telephone, that's great. You can talk to anybody over vast distances. That also had a phone. Who else had a telephone when they were first being rolled out? When you had your first computer and you're able to send an email to anyone around the world, well, that's great, but who else had an email address? Blockchain technology seems like that today. It heralds a new future where we can zip payments instantly back and forth and we can transact with people peer-to-peer, but if no one else has a Bitcoin address, if no one else has an Ether address, what use is that technology? And this walled garden phenomenon is common in all disruptive technology. At first, it doesn't really seem that useful to you today, even though maybe at some point in the future it might be useful. If you take a look at the technology adoption curve, this graph, which I borrowed from The Economist, shows disruptive technologies and how long it took for 25% of the American population to adopt that technology. We can see that in 1873, electricity was used by 25% of the American population, and that took 46 years from the time that electricity was first invented to the time that 25% used it. Similarly, the telephone took 35 years until 25% of the population in America used it. Radio, 31, television, 26. You can see a trend. And the reason for this trend is most new disruptive technologies are built on a technology that came before it. You cannot have a telephone unless you have electricity. You cannot have a PC unless you have electricity. Each one builds upon the next. And this is the same with blockchain technology. It builds on the one that came before it. The most recent disruptive technology before blockchains was the internet. And if we take a look at this, we see that today, 49.7% of the world population uses the internet. 49.7%. Now, that's a surprisingly low number when you consider just how amazing the internet is. It allows you to get information from anywhere in the world, to communicate with people anywhere in the world. Each one of these disruptive technologies, they allow you to do something you couldn't do before. A mobile phone lets you talk to people when you're walking around, but not everybody needs to do that. Television lets you watch stories on a tube, but not everybody really wants to do that. The internet, not everybody needs to do that either. But let me ask you this. Blockchains allow you to transact with anyone in the world. Yes, payments were the first type of transaction to be replaced, so now you can pay anyone in the world. But in the future, many different types of transactions will be replaced. Things like home and property ownership, things like a legal contract between parties. So what percentage of the global population needs to transact with other entities? 100%. Every single one of us at some point needs to buy something or sell something, needs to transfer ownership from one person to another, needs to deal with a legal dispute. And because 100% of the global population needs to transact with others, and because each disruptive technology builds on the last one, it's my belief that blockchain technology will change this world more quickly and more drastically than the internet did. Now that's a bold statement, because those of us who are 30, 35 or older, we remember the world before the internet, and we know just how drastically the world is different today than it was back then. And I'm a firm believer that blockchain technology will change the world more because 100% of the global population needs to use it. Now, blockchains have only been around for the last few years, only for the last 7 years since Bitcoin launched the first blockchain. And if you look at the whole line of computing, which started back in the 1960s, that accounts for only about 12 to 15% of the timeline of computing. That's a fairly small drop in the bucket. Now, whereas all these other the computing technologies, they've had years and decades to build the best practices. Blockchains haven't. You need to have practices before you can have best practices. If you want to bake a cake, you need to break some eggs. You cannot have amazing successes unless you have spectacular failures. Now, our host, Kurt Kumar, was up here earlier handing a beer to some of the speakers to bring on stage, and I brought one as well. And it's kind of timely because I have a question to ask the crowd. Hands up if you, at any point in your life, if you have ever had any alcohol, ever. Put your hand up if you've ever had a sip of wine, a sip of beer, or anything. Okay, now keep your hands up. Put your hands down if you have ever gotten sick because you've had too much alcohol. Or keep it up if you've gotten sick at some point in your life because you had too much alcohol. All right, most of your hands are still up. Now let me ask you this. Keep your hands up if every single time you drink, you always get sick. That's right. We've all had to have spectacular failures, and we all learn from those failures. We've all learned just how much we can drink before we've had too much. We've all learned how to tie up our laces so that we don't trip on them. You need to have these failures in your life in order to grow. And when it comes to the blockchain community, we have had some spectacular successes, but also some spectacular failures. We have had companies go for almost 5 or 6 years without being hacked, like Coinbase. We've also had the disasters of Mt. Gox and Bitcoinica and Bitstamp. And each time this happens, we learn something. We learn why that did not work, and we learned why that did work. Now, every industry has some kind of a standard. Whether you are making food, you need to follow the HACCP standard. If you are going to be storing credit card information on your servers, you need to store them in a way that is PCI compliant. If you're going to be doing accounting, you need to follow the SOC 2 standard. But when it comes to Bitcoin and Zcash and Dogecoin and Ethereum and all these cryptocurrencies, we don't really have a standard yet. Well, at least we didn't until just a few short years ago. The Cryptocurrency Security Standard, the CCSS, is the world's first industry-generated standard for cryptocurrencies. It gives specific prescriptive advice on how to secure the private keys that back all of your cryptocurrencies. Whether you're dealing with Ethereum or Bitcoin or a brand new coin that was just announced on stage earlier today, this standard gives you advice on how to secure those private keys properly. It covers the entire life cycle of cryptocurrencies, everything from the key generation, to the key storage, to the key accessing, to the key usage, who gets to access them. All this together is known as the information system. The software, the hardware, the policies, the procedures, the personnel, all 5 of these aspects come together and need to equally be as strong, like a chain. And like any chain, it's only as strong as its weakest link. And as you can see there, if you have really strong ironclad links that are tied together with a zip tie, it doesn't matter how strong all the other links are in the chain when you're relying on a piece of plastic. So there are 10 aspects in the cryptocurrency security standard. And as I said, they govern the entire life cycle of the private keys, but also the personnel who access the keys, the procedures that those personnel go through, and the training that those personnel received. By separating it out into this way, we can come up with a checklist that makes it very easy to identify the security aspects of a system and whether it is adequate. Once you can grade each of those, now you can come up with an overall system score of level 1, level 2, or level 3. Level 3 is the most secure you can get, but even just level 1 is secure enough. By analyzing all the previous breaches, the researchers at C4 and the security professionals that we worked with at BitGo and a variety of other companies, we took a look at every breach that has happened to date, and we identified all the commonalities. And when we did that, we realized that when you score it this way, there was not a single company that was breached who was able to reach level 1. If any of these companies were to reach level 1, they would simply not have been breached to begin with. Now, this is an example of a CCSS score sheet for a fake company, Acme Exchange. Now, you can see for each of these 10 aspects, the company scored level 1 on all of them. On some of them, for example, wallet creation, they scored level 3. On some other ones, they scored level 2, but not all of them are level 3. Only a few of them reached level 3. Only a few of them reached level 2, but they are consistently reaching level 1 in all 10 aspects. So, just like a chain, which is as strong as its weakest link, this system would be scored level 1, even though they were able to get higher scores on some of the other aspects. Now, as I mentioned, all the thefts in the last 8 years, systems that failed to comply with level 1 were the ones that breached. All the systems that ticked the boxes for level 1 so far have stayed resilient. Now, when you're securing the keys, when you're securing a system, it is all about the private keys. And I personally believe that in the future, everything about security will move to private keys. Today, most of our security for all the systems that we access are based on passwords. You have your banking password, you have your Facebook password, you have your password for everything. Most people can't really remember passwords that well, so what do? We repeat them. Or we come up with a secret algorithm, the name of the site plus a common password. All of these are, unfortunately, very bad ways of securing passwords because humans are simply not good at coming up with enough randomness to secure something. But private keys are generated by computers. They are long, random numbers, and they are strong. So it's my belief that in maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, I'm not sure when, but it's my belief that over time, we will be using passwords less and less, and we will be using keys more and more. We will have keys that access our online banking. We will have a private key to access our Facebook account. We will have a private key to access our airline account, to access our tickets, to access everything in our lives. And these private keys will all be stored on a small device, whether it's our phone or something similar, and passwords will be used less and less. That's it, and if you have any questions, you can find me at the back near the Shapeshift booth. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.